Snip, tuck, fold, crease, tuck, tape.
It's not that complicated, Dad.
Wrap, crease, tape, twist, tape.
Ohio Lottery scratch offs make great holiday gifts. And play Holiday Bonus Millions with a 200 times multiplier and a $2 million top prize.
Fold, crinkle, crinkle, roll.
Plus, you can enter non-winning tickets in My Lotto Rewards for a second chance to win up to 1,000 times the price of your ticket.
Please crinkle, gate, fold, ring, curl, scrunch.
The best part, Dad? No wrapping required.
No tuck, fold?
No tuck, fold.
Give the gift of fun. Lottery players are subject to Ohio laws and commission regulations. Play responsibly.
Welcome to Mind Love, episode 262. Today's episode is all about transmuting confusion into wisdom and other ancient Buddhist teachings for modern troubles. Plus, this episode's dropping on 11/11, so it's gotta be special, right?
Confusion feels mucky and hard to sit with and difficult to work with. And transmutation is a shift of awareness so that the awareness of the mind widens. You have much bigger perspective about it. But often when we're really deep down and biting on a bone, right, and completely have a dog in the fight with whatever it is that we're holding on to, we can't even get there. So it's much like composting. I like the words composting. Alchemy is its normal, turning lead into gold. But much more practical is composting, where you take your leftover good food, which is your life, out and you stay with it in such a way and let it warm and bake and cook and transmute into the good earth and dirt that it is. That's transmutation.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom. So don't forget to subscribe. I keep finding that the more we go back to our roots, the easier everything becomes. Health, peace, joy, connection. Yeah, so maybe not food delivery, but can we even be sure that these modern conveniences are actually improving our lives? Or are they just feeding our neuroses and justifying a life that has no time for basic things? Sorry, that tangent got a hold of me. We think we live in a modern world with modern problems, so clearly we need a modern solution. But what if that's not the case? I think we make things more complicated than they really are. And a big part of that is just perceiving them as more complicated than they are. Have you ever felt completely overwhelmed by something, only to finally stop procrastinating and sit down and plan it all out, and then suddenly it doesn't feel so complicated anymore? Because the pressure isn't all in your head, and you can actually see all the steps, even if you haven't taken them yet. That basically happens to me anytime I plan anything. And I end up realizing that sitting down to plan is always the hardest step to approach. After that, everything becomes easier, or at least clear. But these days, our problems definitely look different than they used to. Technology improves so rapidly that we're running businesses completely differently than we were just a decade ago. We connect with friends differently. We commute differently. We find and consume information differently. And with all these new ways of doing things, there are new problems, so we must need new and different solutions, right? But what I see is that, for the most part, we have all the same problems, just wrapped in different colored bows. We have new ways to distract ourselves, but we still numb reality. We have new ways to engage in our social circles, but we still compare or have communication issues. We have new ways of presenting ourselves, like Instagram and Facebook, but we still try to be someone that we're not. We have new ways to dress ourselves or nip and tuck the parts of us that we don't like, but we're still too tough on ourselves. We have new ways to explore and define relationships, but we still have fears and challenges in them. We still have needs to manage and learn from our emotions. We still have deep desires for purpose. We still want to love and be loved. We still want to grow and learn through life. So, yes, things might look very different on the outside, but inside, we're still the same souls seeking what they came here for from the beginning of time. And I've said this before, but it's worth saying again. People from ancient times had way more wisdom than our current society gives them credit for. Science is just now confirming things that ancient herbalists and medicine doctors knew thousands of years ago. And if you think about it, back then, they just had more time to ponder. Whereas now, we get bored after 30 seconds of silence and pull out our phones. The Buddha sat under a Bodhi tree for God knows how long until he reached enlightenment. So let's give credit where credit's due, okay? So today we're tapping into the ancient teachings of Tibetan Buddhism to apply them to the modern challenges of everyday life. And our guest is Melissa Moore, PhD. She has 3 decades of expertise in leadership in Karuna Training, and she's also the author of The Diamonds Within Us. So 3 key things we will learn are how we begin to develop equanimity or nonjudgmental awareness, the 4-step practice in Karuna Training to lean into and stay with difficult emotional energies skillfully, and how to transmute confusion into wisdom. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Melissa Moore to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So give us a little background on you and what brought your interest to contemplative psychology and Buddhism.
Well, I really wasn't looking for a spiritual path whatsoever. I sort of very much stumbled into it. And it was very connected to a kind of scene that was happening in Boulder, Colorado in the 70s 79 is when I stumbled into it, but it had been going on for a little while with this meditation master, Chogyam Trungpa, kind of a very outrageous man. And he started Naropa Institute, which had Allen Ginsberg, who was a poet, part of the Beat Poets. And there was Barbara Dilley there, who was a dancer I had heard of, and other poets, Peter Orlovsky, and just a lot of cool things happening that I learned about. And I went there actually accidentally to take a dance class and then learned about it that way because I was in Boulder. So one thing led to another, and I kind of got a whiff of something happening. And I followed my instincts, was not following my head. And I knew that suddenly I wanted to go to Naropa. It just felt like the place to go. And at the time, I'd been working in the record business, and that was really kind of going nowhere, and lots of partying and outrageous behavior. And so the spiritual scene in Boulder was also outrageous, or I wouldn't have been interested in it. Now we know, many, many years later, that a lot of harm has been caused in those early years and along the way in our community. And so I have a lot of regrets about that too, in some sense, because I can look back with the eyes of the time we live in now and see the recklessness of the times. But at the same time, for me, I came out of a very reckless, crazy situation. And so I met this Tibetan Buddhist teacher, this master, and he kind of stopped my mind, taught me instantly that wherever I went, my mind was following me. And that was very profound to realize, like, oh, I have to be responsible for this. I have to take care of this. I cannot just be reckless here. It causes pain, not only to me, but to others. So that happened when I was about 24. I'm very fortunate. But it took me many years I was a very untamable person. So I wasn't an instant meditator. I think now I know I had a lot of trauma in my body and I couldn't sit with it. Meditation is demanding, it really requires a certain kind of stability of incapacity to meet things in your body. And I didn't have that developed when I came to the path. It took me many, many years, 8 years probably, to learn how to follow a breath. So I'm a good meditation for that reason. Meditation teacher, and I've been teaching it for many, many years. And I'm very sympathetic to an understanding that, how we come to meditation. It's not like we're trying to fit ourselves into a box. Often we do that, but it's not about doing it right. It's so much about learning how to listen to our bodies and listen to our synchronization of our breath and our mind and train ourselves.
It's so interesting that you talked about how there was a period of time that there was recklessness in the scene. I'm curious if you could go deeper. What was reckless and what do you see now?
Oh, just a lot of promiscuity, a lot of drinking. I was coming from a drug culture. So actually I was cleaning up going into the Buddhist community. That's so strange, but I was. And Trungpa Rinpoche was drinking. So everybody was imitating him. And there was a lot of profound working with your mind at the same time. It wasn't just all frivolous. There was a lot of training happening. Very arduous training. This guy had been in Tibet, he'd been in a monastery. And now that I know a lot about his life, what I didn't really know when I was a young student, but I know a lot now because he's my root teacher and I've studied his work and gotten to know him. And I have a long view on who he was. He escaped Tibet when the Chinese invaded with 200 people, and most of them died on the Himalayan mountains by foot, chased by the Chinese. So he came into a refugee camp with so much trauma, if we want to look at it from today's lens. And yet, his understanding of brilliant sanity and basic goodness and pure mind was such his training that he could just kind of ride through that. But they were starving, they were thirsty, they were starving in the refugee camp. And now I know that I heard this recently, that they didn't even have water, so they were drinking chang, which is beer. And we know how indigenous people's bodies react to alcohol. So now we know that there's genetic interaction with that. So, then he ended up in England and he had an accident and he continued drinking, and he got married to a young Western woman of means. And he ended up in America with a lot of hippies around him in the 70s, right? And he took these rebellious hippies and he got them wearing suits and ties and joining society and having businesses and having families. He was all about joining society, not rebelling against society. And I learned how to eat with a knife and fork. I kid you not. I grew up in Santa Monica with my mother, who worked full-time eating with chopsticks before I could eat with a knife and fork. And so I was like, I've never had sit-down dinners or anything. And suddenly I learned like a certain mindfulness of your life, right? The rituals of your life, the dignity of your life, the daily patterns of your life. He was in the midst of all this craziness. There was all that transmission happening too. So you can't say it was all reckless, but there was recklessness because we regarded everything he did as sacred. And, while I'm not realized enough to know what's true, for me, the medicine worked. But for others, I understand that there was harm and I feel bad about that. I think about that all the time from my compassion practice.
You know what's interesting about mindfulness? It's not just about being present in the moment. It's about being thoughtful about the future. We meditate, we exercise, we work on ourselves, all to create a better tomorrow, right? But there's one piece of the future planning puzzle that nobody likes to talk about. I get it. Life insurance feels heavy. But here's the thing. Just like meditation is an act of self-care, getting life insurance is an act of family care. It's about making sure your love continues to support your family, even when you're not there to do it yourself. That's why I want to tell you about SelectQuote. They're one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience helping over 2 million customers. Their licensed insurance agents work for you to tailor a life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. And here's what's cool. They actually reward you for taking care of yourself. If you're in good health, they work with carriers that could get you same-day coverage for up to $5 million. No medical exam required. And it's way more affordable than you might think. You could even get coverage for up to $1 million for as little as $20 per month. We just did this all recently after putting it off for years, and I can't tell you the peace of mind just from getting it done. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/mindlove. Go to selectquote.com/mindlove today to get started. That's selectquote.com/mindlove. Right before I got on this call, I had like 20 minutes to myself, and one of my friends is a creator and she is putting out videos quite often. She's a writer as well, and she wrote this piece a little over a month ago and it just went viral. And the title of it is just, I regret being a slut. And the whole concept around it is that she feels lied to by the women empowerment movement. And she makes it clear she does not speak for all women from this. There are women that she knows that can have meaningless sex and come out of it feeling empowered. But I've known this person since I was in my early 20s, and she was a little bit older than me, and we were living that time together, and I was right there next to her, and I thought I was empowered. And we had such similar backgrounds, both being sexually assaulted, and I feel like that was part of the way that I took back control of my body, was because I couldn't. This sounds so horrible, but I couldn't be raped if I never said no. And then if I was the one that was like looking for this, and in a way, if I'm really honest and looking back at my past, I was never seeking a one-night stand. If I had ever gotten a call back from any of them, I probably would have been very happy, or felt the worth in that. But instead, it was just always this story that I was telling myself. And so this is the story that she told, and I highly recommend anyone listening to look it up. Bridget Fetisi, I regret being a slut. But it's just taken off, and people have been writing into her. She's reading user letters, and it just really goes to show you that we need so much discernment when we figure out what to follow, especially if it's popular. And it's so easy to be in this crowd of people with a guru, and everyone's looking at that guru as the one to follow. And I do believe that everybody has something to teach. But there's such a danger in believing that this one person holds the whole truth. We each have a part of it. And then same with when all of society is pushing towards something, it seems like no one's ever looking at what could possibly go wrong. And that's happening in so many cases right now. And so it was just so interesting. I literally was like, I usually meditate like the last few minutes right before an interview. And instead I was like just finishing reading her thing, and I put it down, and I had a tear in my eye. And then I was like, no, I need to go on an interview. And that was the first thing you said, was this reckless parts of the times. And I was just like, apparently this needs to be talked about.
Well, it's interesting because this is the times we live in for whatever reason. Maybe it's an evolution of consciousness. Certainly it's an evolution of feminism to understand that agency doesn't mean promiscuity. And so it was the pendulum swinging, the pendulum of society. And my mother was sexually wild. She was wild. And I saw that. And it entertained me. It was sort of like she was her having fun, and getting away from the stoic stuff from Missouri that she got away from, that she escaped, so she was being wild. But in reality, I'm a serial monogamist. I actually don't have reckless sex. It means something to me, and it's damaging when I do that, or when I did that. It was not good for me. I used so many drugs. Drugs were part of that, right? Just to be disembodied enough. But I now know, just knowing myself so well, that, and in relationship, and I'm in my fourth marriage, and I'm very close to my exes, because the relationship meant more to me than the marriage, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And so the marriages are over, but the friendships are deeper. And even my current marriage, and sexuality, it's something I'm still working with because of all this craziness in my youth. So this is the times we live in, is this vision of where we have a longer time period of liberation. And now with the closing doors of Roe versus Wade going awry, and the whole power over one's body, I don't know where we're going here. It's a very curious moment. But, we have a bigger view if we choose that, if we can hold it open.
How do you work with that bigger view? And what I found happens to me, and I'm sure a lot of people, is so say I come through this journey of having that experience and really fully believing, and this is just an example, but I was sexually empowered by this. Things didn't bother me. And then starting to change my mind about that. And one thing my friend Bridget and I were talking about is everyone's like, yeah, of course, when you get married and have kids, you change your mind about your past relationships. But I started to see that before. And it was actually part of the reason I feel like I was healed enough to find my husband.
Partner. Yeah.
But yeah, it was just at least seeing that, maybe this wasn't serving me. Maybe I need to do things another way. And I was doing things another way. But I'm still kind of uncovering the damage that was done with my relationship with sex even. And so I come out the other side, and a big part of me, it's my confirmation bias, maybe the ego that's like, this is how it is. Like, that's just wrong, and it's hard for me to believe that anyone else wouldn't just come to the same realization, and so it's easy to become judgmental.
Yeah, it is. It is. But, it's funny that you say this, because I have a very dear friend who's young, and she's polyamorous with her partner, and they date other couples. And that has been, and she goes, I can't believe you're shocked about my sexuality. And we're talking about the long view of things, because everything is based on consent. And it's very different. It's like a real choice. I don't know the end story of all of it. So, but some people have more of a sexual appetite. So I think there's a range and a choice and a consciousness that you can develop around this.
I spent some time in the polyamorous communities. One of my good friends and neighbors was all about it.
Yeah.
And my husband and I were even talking, like, maybe this is another way to open ourselves up, and to maybe we're just kind of closing ourselves in. And I was really contemplating that for a couple of years and spending time with a lot of people. And by the time I was out of it, I was like, I feel like everyone's lying to themselves. It happened again. My friend who introduced me to it, she ended up breaking down one night, and turned out a big reason for her doing that was because she didn't really feel worthy enough to secure one person. And again, this is all anecdotal. And so it's just all my anecdotal experience is just maybe it's worth exploring. Maybe this is something that I don't know, meant for that opening up. But and then one of the people that I followed at the time, Aubrey Marcus, was all about it too. And then he ended up kind of having this realization. And now he looks back and he's like, that was one of the unhealthiest periods of my life. And so It is just interesting. But the question is less about what is that right or wrong, and more about when you're going through something and you have such a stark realization, it's just so easy to fall into the trap of thinking, well, this is the only way. And all the experience that I keep being presented with is confirming this. But I know that everyone's experience is different. So how do you kind of jump into the non-judgmental awareness?
Well, that's great, because that brings us back to contemplative psychology, because the work is just awareness and perspective, right? And so the reason why we meditate isn't because it's a groovy thing to do. It is a great thing to do, and a lot of people use it for all kinds of reasons. But the meditation that I teach is opened eye, present moment, synchronization of our body, breath, and mind, which allows for a certain intelligence to dawn. A wider intelligence, a more broad perspective that allows for a both and perspective instead of an either or binary. So that's important. And so that means working with emotions. Like, some of us are different in our reaction emotions. Some of us have long ago learned how to deaden emotions, don't feel anything. Some people feel everything and they think everything's their fault. So we have to be on some spectrum and understand where we are with our emotional radar and how we go into interaction or reaction with people. your last podcast was very interesting about attachment and all of that. So much of that can easily map onto contemplative psychology, but an understanding of our biases and how we've been conditioned and how we grew up, and also how we live our life, how we get into patterns and rituals of the same kinds of concepts, like I'm not good enough, or nobody loves me, or whatever it is, are some of the negative ones, but there's also pride, and so we study this kind of things, how these things arise in us in our relationship in a group. What it does is kind of breeds a sense of humor, because we're all doing it, And the other is that it widens our mind to see, like, we don't have to follow every thought we have down the rabbit hole of solidity. We don't have to glam on and say, that's what I think, that's who I am, and that's what I believe. We could actually open up the space and go, oh, there's so many possibilities happening here, and my heart will close if I decide one way or another. So how do I stay open and compassionate? Because there's so much pain in the world. People are in such reaction, really. When we get beyond ourselves and we open up to others, we start to see, oh, there's so much pain and reaction going on, And if we stay in equanimity, then that really brings a lot of balance and peace to the world. It's actually very residual. I believe that it's helpful.
That is such a profound way to look at it. And I don't think anyone's ever voiced it in that way of, if I identify with this one thing, and then my heart closes.
Yeah.
And there's something about that resonates with me. It's probably something I will use for the rest of my life, because
I hope so.
So often
mind love.
Yes, exactly. And so
mind
often
love.
though, I feel like my whole past has been like this search for truth. And it started because of my religious upbringing that I just found a lot of holes in. And I was like, I feel like there's something more. And so I'm like, I need to find the truth, because this has been given to me as the truth.
Yeah.
And what I find, as the wiser I get, as I open to spirituality, that the one truth I feel like is just love. Like, I don't know how deep in the spirit. It's like, that's the truth, and everything
love
else
is true. Love is true.
Subjective.
We have such an endless resource of love in us, but only if we're open.
Yeah.
And only if we stay with wide mind, because otherwise we get so narrow and fuck this person and fuck that person. So it's just like, we get into the solid territory of me, and I don't like what that publican has to say, or whatever it is. And it's so narrow. You can't breathe. We can't breathe. We wall off ourselves.
Why do you think we have such this visceral reaction, and we feel so closed, when so many times the things that we're arguing over are things that literally do not affect us? For example, it does not affect me how other people engage in their relationships. But because of my life experience and what I've seen, which is a very limited perspective,
right.
I am aware of that. I feel like I'm right. It's like I have this voice when somebody presents this polyamorous relationship to me that's just like, oh, you poor soul, I really hope you don't get hurt. But I know that's just ego. And like I said, from a very limited perspective. And also, to make it even crazier, I do have one friend who seems to be in a healthy, loving, open relationship. And she is a seemingly healthy, loving person. But somehow my brain will omit that when I'm thinking of evidence.
Well, probably you have pain there that you're projecting out. You have pain inside you that has accumulated. And now if you meet it externally, you think you project your experience on their experience, but it's never that way. And it's narrow-minded to think it is that way. But we don't, we're very habitual creatures. So if we don't resolve these painful things in us, which we have to, we can't get around them. We can't bypass the traumas and the things that we carry, because our body remembers whether our mind does or not. So we have to take time to bring a lot of loving kindness to our experience, whatever it is, even when we don't understand it. And most of the time we don't. So I can get really critical and down that route. This is why I can talk about it so well. I can get so narrow-minded and negative, particularly with headlines. I have to be careful with headlines.
Same.
So I just try and I try to go to the most painful part of that, whatever it is that I'm reacting to, and just feel how painful it is. Why am I in such reaction? Because I feel so helpless. I feel so helpless. And I know that people are suffering. So it's, that's good to feel that. That makes me stronger to feel the pain of the world. So that's different than getting, this is what I work with all the time. But it's hard because we have a lot of conditioning and habits of being opinionated.
For sure. Confirmation bias is so real. And it's like the more time I spend studying things, the more likely I am to believe that I'm right with it.
Yes.
I've been married now for years, and so I'm not finding other partners, and I'm not doing all of the things, almost all. Every now and then I'll go down a Netflix rabbit hole, but that's my last numbing tendency. But what I'm realizing, especially in the last few years, is that I had sort of compartmentalized these difficult moments or these difficult emotions of feeling pain from something that happened in my past, feeling this. But when it comes to that sort of projection trigger where it's like, oh, these people, or this is happening in the news and this is the new law that they're passing. I can't believe this. I forget that that's a difficult emotion that I need to work with.
I know.
And I know that you have
It seems so justified.
Right? I'm just like, you're wrong and I'm right, clearly. And so I know
that can be fun.
Yes.
You have to kind of embrace that and say, okay.
Judging people can be fun. Yeah.
Well, getting on our high horse can be fun.
Yeah. And so I know that you have a 4-step practice to actually lean into and stay with the difficult emotional energy. Because like I said, I've uncovered this whole thing. I'm like, oh, that's still my own difficult emotion I need to work with. Just because I think it's about other people doesn't mean it is.
Yeah.
So what is that
great.
4-step process? Because I think I need a structure again. I know that you have a 4-step practice to actually lean into and stay with the difficult emotional energy. So what is that 4-step process? Because I think I need a structure again.
Okay, so in the beginning, we have to come present and begin to identify just whatever energy is going on in our body. So instead of usually when we have an emotional reaction or when we're pointing the finger at others, we're in our heads, and we're thinking about things and we've already skyrocketed into opinions and all kinds of theories. But so the first step is coming really present and really kind of doing a body scan to see where in my body is the energy pooling. Often it's several places, but we can usually pick one place in our bodies where we might feel something, that's prominent. Like if we're getting angry, we might feel it in our throat, or we might feel it in our gut, or we might feel something in our heart. Wherever it might be, our head, people are different. So wherever it is, you identify. That's the first step, and you're present with it. You're not trying to label it. You're not trying to fix it out. You're not trying to push it down. You're not trying to act it out. Those are the options. If you act it out, you're just adding fuel to the fire. If you're suppressing it, you're not listening, right? So it's identifying the energy. Like it might just be a sensation, or you feel like you can't breathe, whatever it is. Usually this can be very hard for people, this first step, because people are so disembodied. So we spend a lot of time in Karuna really finding where in our bodies can we feel the energy. Step 1. Step 2 is we become very curious about it. We hold it with absolute loving kindness and get curious. It's like if you found a baby bird on the ground and you picked it. Recently, we found a baby squirrel, actually, that had fallen out of its nest my husband so lovingly went and looked on the internet, and then he found out you put it in a warm blanket and put it in the bottom of the tree. If it's still breathing, maybe the mom will come get it. And we did that. So that's how you hold these emotions, with this incredible, loving, tender care. And it's the opposite of what you would normally do, because believe me, I've been fighting squirrels all summer with my garden. So this is like moving close. The second step is moving close to the energy, being so loving and curious about it, and putting a container of loving kindness around it. And then the third step is when you bring that much attention to the energy, energy is dynamic by nature. It moves. It's not stagnant. It's always moving, and it's impermanent, and it changes. So you bring it intentionally to your heart to wizen us, to bring it, to awaken us, to bring the full wisdom of what's true about whatever it is we're feeling, to inform us. We don't even have to figure it out in our head. Just bring it into the heart. The heart is much better brain than this one. So we let it permeate us. And then we purposely, when we're ready, doing this on our own time, we notice where we are in the room, bring ourselves present, and allow the space to just receive and dissolve and come back to the present moment, and just know that we don't have to figure everything out in our head, that we can work with the wisdom of energy through our embodied presence and love.
I love the idea of bringing it to your heart in order to receive the wisdom. Little things like that get me. Those are the things that stick with me. I'm like, okay, now move it to my heart. But why? Oh yeah, the wisdom.
And we think that, we have to get rid of our anger. Anger is there for a reason. It's how we say no to ourselves and to others. We need to say no, right? You have a toddler. You have to say
I need to learn how to say no. Come back to me in a few years when he's a little less cute, and then I'll have said no. But one thing I do resonate with is, I remember doing a breathwork ceremony years ago, and it was a heart opening breath work where you breathe into your belly and kind of move it up, and we did it for like an hour.
Oh yeah.
And I felt this very clear opening, and I just started sobbing. And so it's something that I've been aware of since, is I do believe energetically I have, at least at one point, I think it's in the process of opening, I think I still have work to do, of opening up my heart, of kind of removing that blockage, because I can still feel it there. And I know I get into these modes where it's triggered, and I feel very closed off from it. And it doesn't mean I'm not giving love to the people around me, but it's like I can't feel the receiving of love, maybe.
Yeah. Well, one thing is, we have to look at our daily rituals, because I'm really a big believer that we're not resourcing ourselves enough on a daily basis to meet the challenges and the information that we're holding. So we all have our particular challenges, like you have children, and we all have our challenges that we must be responsible for, whatever that might be. So there's those duties. But then there's the duties of the world that we're facing right now, and the changing times that we live in, and the fact that the truth that the immigration issues that's why we see all these right-wing heavy leaders showing up. It's because of borders. It's all about immigration and borders, because people are coming because of the hurricane that's going on in Florida right this moment. And so we must be collaborators with the energies of this world, and we must learn how to live with them, because they're not going away. We have to be stewards now. And I feel very strongly about this, and I feel it's maybe the most important part of what we're working with to prepare for the times that we're living in. It's not the 80s anymore, we're in a very different time. So this is on my heart a lot, and I'm really looking for ways to find. So this is one of the reasons I'm doing a lot of podcasts, and this is a totally new medium for me, but I'm willing to go there, because I feel like often what I teach, it should be taught in kindergarten to children, is how to work with their energy in such a way that they become wise, not shut off.
How would you teach that to a child?
Oh, well, I would, like, when a child has pain, I would get them to describe it to me. Where is it in their body? What do they feel? What's going on? And can we make a place for that and have it be our teacher? Can we be close with that energy, and I would teach them to learn how to relate to their bodies as teachers and open up to the world, and understand that emotions come and go, and that we need to feel them, not suppress them, and not act them out either when we're angry. When a kid's angry or something, and then that's a time to really get them to feel their anger. But you have to have good communication skills, and sometimes kids are very different. They can be very ADHD. I mean, my neighbor's child who was born during COVID, I really believe the masks were really an issue for people.
Studies
And
are,
children-
are proving that. What everyone
Yeah,
was screaming right when it was happening, and everyone called them crazy or focusing on the wrong thing. And now it is very clear. Every study shows that the
Yeah.
kids that were masked are a year behind.
Yeah, and that whole thing. So the verbal thing, but I think, my neighbor's child, she's so kinesthetically awake. Like this child is in her body and moving and moving. And I said, okay, then we have to learn to communicate like that, right? That's great. That might be an evolution. It's just, yeah, I don't know. I didn't have children, so I had many, many students, but they're adults, even though they act like children sometimes.
Well, I will
But
say
I
that
never had children.
having a child, it's made me a better communicator with adults, because I think so often we overcomplicate things, and the way you just described how to teach that to a child is the way that most adults need to see it. And then you want to go deeper, and you want to know the whys and a different way to look at things, and something that resonates, and that's true, but it comes back to those basics. And then watching them, so often you see these basic things reflected that I didn't even understand before. Just like, or like he'll be throwing a tantrum, and I'm like, inside I'm throwing a tantrum as well. You're actually you're maybe handling it better than I am. I'm just getting passive aggressive. At least you're screaming.
One time I did this program in Spain, and we had a children's version of it, and we were out doing these Maitri postures. If you read my book, we take different postures, and it teaches you about space awareness and the different energies of each of the elements of space and water and earth and air and fire. So we were doing these things, and then the children had their own like daycare situation. But I have to say the kids became the absolute teachers with the elements. Like they understood them so much better than the adults. It was amazing. They were able to they got all the adults playing in the mud one day, and just, the direct play of it and the direct access to elemental energy. I think children really have a handle on that. So,
Well, since we're there, give us an intro of what elemental energy is and how it can help us, or how we can practice with it.
we use an ancient mandala that comes from tradition called the Five Buddha Family Mandala, and this was offered to Western students by Trungpa Rinpoche to work with this notion of space awareness. So the outer aspect of the elements, outer aspect of this mandala are the elements. In the center is space, and everything arises from space and dissolves into space. So it's the birthing place and the charnel ground of life. And everything is existing within it. And then you have in each direction, in the east, you have water, and that's a certain kind of energy. In the south, you have earth, and that's a certain kind of energy. In the west, you have fire, and that's a certain kind of energy. And in the north, you have wind. And so that's just a typical mandala. It's a little different in the Native American, it's a similar kind of, the medicine wheel is a similar kind of mandala. But we're not looking at our particular types, because there's also the inner aspect of this mandala has emotional energies. And the energies very much replicate the elements. So like water can get very cold, like cold anger. It can be, or hot anger. It can be boiling, it can be frozen, it can be boiling, it can be flowing. It can be very reflective, like a mountain lake. And its wisdom is mirror-like wisdom, the capacity to reflect things exactly as they are, like water can. That capacity of mind to reflect accurately is the wisdom. So that's the mind aspect. So we study the elemental body, the energetic speech, the energies, the emotions, and the mind transformation, how that happens, the transmutation of confusion into wisdom. And so knowing the elements is the basis. And this is what children know. There's nothing in the world not made of the elements from this. So and Trungpa Rinpoche once said, if we understood how all the elements work together, we would understand everything there was to know about karma. We would understand all cause and effect and the laws of that. And that is a very profound thing. So we have the capacity as human beings to communicate. We're not separate from the wisdom of the world. The wisdom of the world knows the cycles of the moon and the sun, and the trees know when to change, and birds know when to build their nests. We're part of that wisdom. And so we've delegated that a lot to priests and to Rinpoches and to various therapists and various people. But we know it much longer than we've forgotten it. It's deep in our cellular knowing. So in Karuna, we work very hard to come back to that knowing by working with mandalas and doing these space awareness practices, which is just further mind training and heart training.
And so say somebody had a deep emotion and they wanted to work with that. Is it more about just sort of tuning in and asking for the wisdom of what element that this pertains to? Or is it
not really.
Change?
It's more studying over time and becoming familiar with energies. And so when you have a big emotion, you go right to the body and feel. There's nothing more to do. Get out of the head and get into the body and feel it, accommodate it, befriend it. Don't look for answers at all. That gets in the way. Don't worry about what element it is. Just be with the energy and feel it. It's got something to teach us through feeling.
Yeah, that makes so much sense because so often we go into, we've read so many books that it's like,
right, pull our medicine cards out.
Yeah. And it's like, wait, but now you've just worked yourself up. You're madder than when you started.
Yeah.
You feel more right than when you started. There's no wisdom here because you were in your head the whole time. And
exactly.
So how do you work with the mandala then? I hear about that quite often. I've never done it, but is it just more of a meditation technique of kind of letting
No, it's like learning that it's all a circle with the center, and there's always a mandala happening. Your household is a mandala, right? There's a center of your household. It might be the kitchen, might be the playroom, who knows, right? So, and understanding there's a center and a circumference. So that's all mandala means. But sacred mandala, like the 5 Buddha families, has real intention and practice and purpose. And then other mandalas that you can find, such as this Tibetan art mandala. I don't know if this is on camera, but anyway, I'm showing a picture of Karma Pakshi. So these energies in Tibetan art are always aspects of your own mind. And that's what people don't understand. They're personifications of real wisdom in your own mind. And this particular wisdom is wrathful compassion, that there are times that you need to take a stand and say no. And it cuts through a lot of confusion. And so each of these things, so that's a mandala. That's showing you a mandala, right? And so that's a meditation technique. So this is now how we use it in Western, or on my desk. If you were to see my desk, I have little mandalas everywhere because I have certain things that I'm working on, like I'm putting out my book. I want it to be successful, so I'll build a mandala. I understand the energies and I'm familiar with how it works, so I can utilize the mandalas that way in my life. Does that make sense?
It does. And one thing I love diving into different religions. And when I was studying something, one of the religions that has multiple gods, there's something about it that I'm like, I totally understand why this calls to people. Because when I grew up in the religion I was born into, there's so much of give it to God. And I I have a different relationship with that now. There's moments that I greatly respect it because, it's just out of your mind. Just like we were just talking about,
Right.
you're not, it's like lean not on your own understanding. So you just give it over here, but that doesn't always work for everybody, And so there's
Well, I
something
think
to
it
be,
can be very powerful. I mean,
yeah.
obviously, or so many people are using that.
But for
I
the
think,
multiple gods, it's like, there's something to be said about having this one specific thing, this one specific God that deals with this one specific thing. And so when I'm dealing with it, feeling in tune with that, and I was studying the goddesses and the goddess of this and the
yeah,
goddess of that, and
yeah,
I went through this month of having all my meditations were like, okay, well, what am I feeling? Which goddess is that? And then kind of tuning into that, and
that's nice.
it was a whole
Yeah.
different energy. And so I appreciate the mandala of like this is this particular thing that I'm
Yeah.
working on, and that's the energy that I'm going to bring in.
Yeah, well, I've always been very interested in all of these things and the occult and different systems, and have studied Native American and all kinds of different paths. I got that from my mother. My mother did that. She was really a spiritual seeker. But I really feel like the most important thing about all of it is that, and this is very Buddhistic, we don't, those gods are not external, they're aspects of ourselves and our abilities. That's why my book is called The Diamonds Within Us. It's like we have these incredible talents, and yours are very unique than mine are, right? So we each bring something to this life, and we're here to do some kind of, we would say, Buddha activity, right? Some kind of good work in the world, like your podcast is doing such good work. And so I think, and finding ways to express that in our body, speech, and mind, everybody, that might happen in a Pentecostal church or I don't know what. I think there's so many paths. Again, keeping that really wide mind, But one thing is in Karuna, even though it's drawing on Tibetan Buddhism, nobody has to be a Buddhist at all to study this or learn anything about meditation or contemplative psychology. It's very non-denominational. We're not a spiritual path. We're a training, complete training with continuing education, and you get a certificate in contemplative psychology. It's a real deal, It would be what you would study if you went to Naropa contemplative psychotherapy, only you're not learning to be the therapist. You're just learning all the tools in the ancient recipe for opening your heart and living with an open heart and being beneficial to others. That's what we're up to.
I love that, and it makes so much sense. Because that's how I identify with the whole concept of God. That it's this, and so that was a big shift for me that I don't always align with my mother, where I'm like, yes. And so I've been really focusing on where our beliefs coincide and trying to bring that to light. So it's not such this hot topic, but it doesn't always work. But
is your mom there with you? Is she listen to your podcast?
Not this episode. No. No, she'll tune in sometimes. She's like, "Did you bring me up again?" I'm like,
maybe this episode won't make it to the air.
No, she knows. She knows all the things I say on the show. I say very much to her, but there's so much about her path that I appreciate the dedication to it, and I learn from it. But for me, I need something more, and I respect that it works completely for her. And so that's it goes back to what we were talking in the very beginning of trusting that just because something doesn't work for me doesn't mean it doesn't work for somebody else. And I just want that same kind of acknowledgement back. But I wanted to ask one more thing that you said that I just want you to go deeper however you feel called to. But you talked about the transmutation of confusion into wisdom.
Yeah.
What comes up when I just ask, what does that mean?
Well, confusion into wisdom, right, is like when we're in our confused state, when we're in our habit mind, when we're in our I'm not good enough, or they don't like me, or I don't belong, or whatever it is, the variation on the theme of constricted and in ourselves and not feeling good or angry about something, whatever it is, whatever direction it takes. That's confusion, right? That feels mucky and hard to sit with and difficult to work with. And transmutation is much like all it means really is a shift of awareness so that the awareness of the mind widens and you become much more perspective. You have much bigger perspective about it. But that often when we're really deep down and biting on a bone, right, and completely have a dog in the fight with whatever it is that we're holding on to, we can't even get there. So it's much like composting. I like the words composting, not alchemy as its normal, lead, turning lead into gold, but much more practical is composting, where you take your leftover good food, which is your life, out and you stay with it in such a way and let it warm and bake and cook and transmute into the good earth and dirt that it is. That's transmutation, right? And so, but that can happen in a very quick moment. It usually happens because you get popped. You're walking around. It can be very tiny pops. Like just this morning, I was in a real hurry. We had the contractor upstairs and I ran downstairs and I noticed every one of my kitchen cabinets was standing open. And I was like, okay, you can just see your mind, right? And just kind of, okay, I need to slow down here. This is silly, or it can be really big things that you've been holding on to. And suddenly you just get that you're just being an ass, or you're just, like a dog with a bone. So there's so many opportunities when we're dug in deep that we're in confusion, where things are confused. You don't know what to do with your child. You don't know what to do with your parents. You don't know what to do with, you have to make decisions, right? And you don't know what to do. Don't do anything. Sit with it. Be with it. It's so difficult, but practical.
Yeah. And there's so much wisdom to be found in learning to sit with discomfort in general. And I don't think we realize how often the discomfort is just like internally created. We really want to project it onto everything around us. Your house isn't big enough. My kids aren't behaved enough. Don't make enough money. But most of the turmoil is actually just whatever our thoughts and our mind is coming up with about the circumstances.
So there's, and this is something that Buddhism teaches, that there's 4 types of suffering you cannot avoid as a human being. That's birth, old age, sickness, and death. Birth, old age, sickness, and death. Those come with the contract of being alive, right? And those are suffering. There's real suffering when death occurs, especially if it's a tragic death. Even though birth is always celebrated and there can be new beginnings are very hard and difficult and they cause pain. And old age or anything wearing out, whether it be the house, the kitchen sink, or our bodies, and death. I mean, birth, old age, sickness, and death comes with the contract. Then there's all the things we do to avoid those things. It's like the extra things we do, not to look old, not to making sure that we don't, it just goes on and on, right? All the ways in which we add a hat on top of a hat on top of a hat. We keep adding things that cause us a lot of suffering. So we always have to distinguish, what kind of problem is this really? And pain am I? Because like losing a child is real pain that has to be sat with for a very long time. There's just no answer to that tragedy, right? And so that's not neurotic pain. That's the truth of being human. So it's like that. That's how I think of it. I hope that's helpful.
It is helpful. And there's so many things that we can work with from this episode and even more in your book that we didn't even get to touch on. So for listeners that are interested in learning more about you and your book, where's the best place for them to connect?
It's at Amazon. It's available both in paperback and on Kindle as well in Audible. I read it, so it's also available that way. It all comes through Amazon, I'm afraid. I should make it available other ways. It's available in a few bookstores, but so very local. So, so that's the best way.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/262. Your challenge for this week is simple. it's just to find a little stillness. The reason I'm choosing this as a challenge is because it's in that place of stillness that we allow our higher selves to come through. Without the stillness, we don't have the time or the space to transmute our confusion into wisdom. We don't have the time or the space to allow our survival mode, our fight or flight, to dissipate in order to find a more meaningful action or allow our higher selves to shine through. So this week, just focus on that stillness. Whether you're carving out space for stillness or you're just taking a deep breath before you react, you are not picking up your phone when you have the first inclination, and instead just bask in the space around you. Feel your own energy. Allow yourself to reach boredom. I found that one of the best things I can do with my free time is to actually get comfortable with it. Get comfortable with the space. Get comfortable with the boredom. Because you never know what exists there if you're always filling it up with other things. And let me know how it goes. Maybe we can find some space together. Reach out to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa. Instagram is where I share a little bit more about how I use the tools from Mind Love in my personal life. So yes, there's baby photos. There's going to be a lot of baby photos for the next few years, but they're always accompanied with some sort of insight on how I'm using these teachings. So if you are looking for more inspiration or motivation to apply some of the things you learn on the Mind Love podcast in your day-to-day activities, definitely hit me up on Instagram or follow me there. You can also join Mind Love Premium at mindlove.com/premium. There's going to be a lot of changes to Premium around the first of the year, so get in now. That's mindlove.com/premium. And other ways to support the show is by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, which is one of my favorite ways of supporting. I just love hearing how Mind Love is changing you or affecting you, because it's probably my biggest motivation for showing up at the mic several times a week. Or you can support one of my amazing sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.